YouTube, what's up? Back again for another daily fishing video here on Andrew Upshaw Fishing. Hope y'all enjoyed yesterday's recap of day one of the Bassmaster Open on Grand Lake. It was a really tough tournament. It was hard to get bites. I kind of salvaged the day and caught about 9 pounds, almost 9 pounds. Day two is going to be posted tomorrow around 3 p.m. I'm subject to bad internet here in East Texas, so I'd love to be posting them at noon, but it's just not working out that way. So 3 p.m. is going to be the time, so make sure y'all stay tuned for that. A lot more fish catches and a lot more fun in that particular video. Today, though, guys, I have a very special video. I honestly shouldn't talk about it, and that's not some clickbaity bullcrap. This is something that I shouldn't talk about because it absolutely puts more fish in the boat for you, and that's using the technique called dead sticking. We're going to dive into it, talk about all the different types of techniques that you can use within that particular technique. So whether it be flipping, throwing finesse baits, throwing a football jig out deep, using it in a couple different scenarios. I also have on the water footage of flipping some lily pads with it and show you how I use it in that particular manner. But hey, if you have not subscribed to my YouTube channel, make sure you do so. It's in the bottom right hand corner of the screen. A little red square, you just click on it and it will tell you to just enter your email address and you're subscribed. So make sure you do that. It's super, super easy. And comment below if these tips and tricks are helping you. And if you have one that you want me to do a video on, I'll be glad to do so. But hey, let's dive right on into this, guys. So there's a ton of situations where I feel like we shake our rods too much. We give our bait too much action and we take the bait away from fish. A lot of times we are overfishing our baits, whether it be we're on a crunch for time or we're impatient, whatever it may be, whatever your excuse is, stop it. So that is one of the biggest problems I see with anglers is they'll be sitting here and they're just shaking their rods all the time. They're swimming their worms. They're doing all these things. It's great in certain situations. Absolutely great. Certain times of year, certain situations where fish are active. But what happens when the fish aren't active? What do? You're not going to get as many bites. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I have some on the water demonstration of this in action where it has been effective. But the deal is, it's not even just about that. It's about paying attention to the conditions. Did you have a front come through? Are the fish tighter to the cover? There's so many variables that come into play. But dead sticking is something I learned a long, long time ago. And I kind of learned it by accident. And it was more of just kind of one of those things. I didn't read about it or anything like that. I just started doing it. And I didn't even know there was a name for it at the time. But there was, absolutely. I didn't create it. It had been around for years and years and years before I started using it. But I remember on Toledo Bend, there was a certain situation where I was taking a weightless stickworm. It was when a Cinco had first come out, but I didn't have Cincos. I had some wave worms or something. And I was on Toledo Bend, and I was casting the stickworm around on these deeper points. Not deep, like 5, 6, 8 foot around that range. Weightless, though. And you would throw that thing out there, and you just let it sit. And the longer you let it sit in a high percentage spot, the more likely you were to get a bite. If you moved it or shook it or anything like that, you wouldn't get any bites, especially on those cold front days. That's just one situation. I've run into other situations where my buddy and I, Ryan Watkins, won the national championship in Arkansas. We were fishing a really small lake there in Arkansas, and one of the big keys there was to not move our drop shot. And Ryan actually figured it out that day. So hats off to him, but he would drop his drop shot down, and he would just hold it still. And if you held it there for about 10 to 15 seconds without moving it, which is a long time, guys, that is a long time for holding a bait still, even mentally, you're 1001, it takes a while. So that actually got us most of our bites by not giving our bait any action. And it may have been because they'd already seen 100 drop shots there, or, they were under a lot of pressure. It was in August. It was hot. The fish were just really lethargic. So they weren't wanting to chase a bait. They weren't wanting a bait with an enormous amount of action. So by doing that, we got way, way more bites. Now, the time when I use it the most, I would absolutely argue to say it is the time I use it the most, is flipping heavy cover. So many times I see guys that are flipping cover, and they flip their bait in there, and it doesn't even hit the bottom, and they're already doing this. And you've done it. I've done it. We've all done it at some point. We get impatient, we get in a hurry, and we're just shaking our rod, reeling it in, flipping again. And we do this way, way too often. So what I implore you to do is the next time you're out flipping, throwing a football jig, is be conscious about it and make that conscious effort to slow your bait down. You can fish fast, but slow. You can cover a lot of water, but you got to be really smart about it. So instead of flipping your bait out there and shaking it before it even hits the bottom, let it go to the bottom. Then tighten your line up, let it sit there for a second, hop it up once, and let it sit there for a few more seconds, 3 or 4 or 5 seconds. Then tighten up. If there's not a fish on it, reel it in and make another flip. Same way goes out there for finesse fishing. I see so many guys that make the mistake of throwing their shaky head out there, and they'll bomb it out there real far. And you know, a shaky head has a pretty slow fall for the most part, unless you're throwing like a 3/8 or a ½ ounce or something. But if you're throwing like an 1/8 ounce, 3/16, and you're throwing it out in 15 foot of water, it takes a minute. Or not a minute, but it takes a little time for it to get all the way down. So next time you're out there, instead of, you know, trying to move it or feel if there's a fish on it immediately, just let it go. Let your line fall slack onto the water, and let it sit there for a second and just watch your line. You don't have to tighten your line, just watch your line. Let it lay out there on the bottom and see what happens. And if you're watching your line, if there's a fish that eats it, you're going to see it go ding, and your line's going to jump. Then reel in and set the hook. But let it sit out there for 5 or 10 seconds. You know, I was recently at Grand Lake, and I read the day one report of Kenta. It was leading it with like almost 22 pounds or 21 pounds, whatever it was. And he was using a technique from Japan where they actually make a cast and let it sit there for 20 minutes. You heard that right. And I actually had to reread the article because I was like, wait a minute. 20 minutes? Dude, I can't, like, I'm sitting there for a minute not moving it sometimes, and I'm like, oh my God, like, I can't do this anymore. But that's the reality of it, guys. Like, if you are in a high percentage spot, maybe the peak of a rock pile or the edge of a ledge, and you know your bait's at that edge of the ledge, and you know that's where the fish are sitting, it doesn't hurt to let it sit there. Just let it sit for longer and longer and longer. And sometimes, if you let it sit in the right spot for long enough, you will get that really, really big bite, because that fish, especially a really big fish, a 6 to 10 pounder, that maybe has seen a bunch of baits, is sitting down there and it's just looking at your bait. You got to almost visualize that it's just sitting there looking at like your sight fish, and your bait's on its bed, and you know that fish is there. Just let it sit, let it sit, let it sit, and then eventually they're going to eat it. You know, I actually ran into the exact same situation at St. Lawrence River this year. I would find these fish, and so to back up a second, I was at the St. Lawrence River. I was catching a bunch on 5-pound tests. I had a lot of guys say, man, you don't need 5-pound. But where I was fishing, I honestly believe the reason I needed 5-pound was because that was what was getting the most pressure. It was on the American side, so that was all that was allowed to fish for quite some time. You know, Canada was off limits for so long, so that American side was getting way more pressure. But what I was doing is I'd take that drop shot and I'd flip it out on these rock piles, and I'd see them go down with live scope, and I'd just have to hold my bait still with a 5-pound line, not shake it at all, and just let it sit there. Let it sit there. And sometimes I'd have to let it sit there 30, 40 seconds before they would eat it, but they would be giant fish, like giant ones. Because what these fish are getting used to is we throw our bait out there and we're shaking it and jerking it, shaking it and jerking it. And if you give your bait too much action, it definitely scares the fish. I think it scares them away, especially a pressured fish. They will swim away so fast, like they will be gone. The slower, more natural your presentation, the more fish you're going to put in the boat. That's something that a buddy of mine, Ben Matsubu, does a ton with a football jig, a drop shot, any deep water bait, is he slows it down. But, you know, earlier I talked about fishing fast but slow. In a situation where you can do that, beyond the flipping side of things, I do it with a Ned rig a ton. If you watch any of my Ned rig videos, you've seen me do it a few different times. So one of the big keys there is finding targets. So I'll cast my Ned rig to a target. I'll let it sit there beside the target for X amount of time, maybe 30 seconds, 40 seconds, and I'll just keep my line tight. I won't move it, I won't drag it, I won't hop it, nothing like that. Just let it sit there. If the fish is there, he'll eat it. If he's not, I reel it in and make another cast to another target, whether it's stumps, laydowns, rocks, a little outcropping of rocks, grass, whatever it may be. You can really fish fast that way, and you're more so concerned on exactly the cover you're fishing instead of dragging it out and fishing it for a long period of time. Make the cast, let it go to the bottom, let it sit there. Nothing happens, reel it in, make another cast. I mean, and that's it. But dead sticking definitely works. So figuring out when to shake it, when not to shake it, more times than not, especially on pressure bodies of water, especially with a lot of boats and tournaments, not shaking it has worked out more often than not for me on the tournament scene. So guys, I hope y'all enjoyed this fishing tip. I know it's short but sweet, but I know it's definitely something that you can learn from and will help you the next time you're on the water. If you get a chance, make sure you like my video and comment below if this tip has worked for you, and subscribe if you get a chance. Guys, I hope y'all enjoyed this video, and I'll see you on the next one.